Welcome back to the deep dive. We are incredibly glad you're here with us today.
Yeah, it's great to have you listening.
Whether you are prepping for a big meeting, trying to catch up on global trends, or you're just insanely curious about the invisible forces shaping the world around you, you are in exactly the right place.
Absolutely. We have a really fascinating topic today.
We do. We have a very specific mission today. We are going to explore the defining spatial process of our modern era, which is urbanization.
Right.
We've got our hands on some incredible source material, specifically excerpts from The Global Rise and Form of Modern Urbanization, which is from the AP Human Geography Topic 6.2 framework.
It's a fantastic breakdown of the data.
It really is, and it maps out exactly how human settlements are rapidly evolving right now. So we're going to take you on a journey from massive, sprawling 20 million person metacities to some very strange, almost accidental new forms of suburban sprawl.
It's going to be a wild ride.
By the end of this conversation, we want to help you understand exactly how the world's population map is radically shifting right under our feet.
And it really is a radical shift. The sheer scale of this demographic movement is, well, it's unlike anything we have ever seen in human history.
Yeah.
We are effectively watching the geography of the human race rewrite itself in real time.
Okay, let's unpack this, because to really grasp what is happening, we need to start by untangling a couple of foundational concepts.
Let's see.
When we look at this spatial data, there seems to be a very sharp distinction drawn between the term urbanization and the urbanization rate. Is that just, academic hair splitting, or is there a functional difference you need to know to actually understand the data?
It is definitely not just hair splitting. That distinction is the absolute key to understanding the mechanics of city growth. Urbanization is the overarching process.
Right.
It refers to the actual forces, the dynamics, and the human behaviors that cause cities to grow and expand in the first place. It is the action itself. The urbanization rate, on the other hand, is simply the measurement of that action at a specific point in time. It measures the percentage of a given population that currently lives within urban bounds.
So if I'm understanding this right, it's essentially the difference between the engine driving the car and the reading on the speedometer.
That is a perfect way to look at it. And if we look at that speedometer right now, the numbers are staggering. We have officially crossed a major threshold as a species.
Which is?
Currently, just slightly over 50% of the entire global population lives in cities. For the first time in human history, we are a majority urban planet.
Wow, that alone is a massive milestone. But looking at the projections in our research, 50% is just the beginning, isn't it?
Not even close to the end. The United Nations projections in the data estimate that by the year 2050, that global urbanization rate is going to hit nearly 70%.
Wait, let me stop you there. 70%.
70%.
To put a hard number on that for you listening, that means adding an additional 1.2 billion people to urban areas in just a few decades.
Yeah, it's a terrifyingly large number.
How is that even physically possible? I mean, 1.2 billion people is essentially the entire combined populations of North America and Europe packing up and moving into city environments in a relatively short window of time. Our current cities already feel like they are bursting at the seams.
They do. And that is exactly the pressure point geographers are looking at. It completely changes how we need to think about global infrastructure and development. But perhaps the most counterintuitive detail in all of this research is where this explosive growth is actually taking place.
Because you'd assume.
Right. If you are sitting in a major city in North America or Western Europe, you might look around at the construction cranes and assume the West is driving this boom.
I know, I definitely would have assumed that. But the data shows something completely different.
It really does.
The fastest growing cities are actually located in what the research calls periphery and semi-periphery regions. Basically, we are talking about developing nations and regions that are rapidly industrializing rather than the fully industrialized Western world.
Exactly. This growth is heavily concentrated in parts of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. We are seeing massive waves of internal migration streaming into hubs like Dhaka in Bangladesh and Lagos in Nigeria. What's fascinating here is the sheer scale of that rural to urban migration and the specific drivers pushing it forward. You don't get millions of people uprooting their lives without massive systemic incentives.
So what are those incentives?
Well, the research outlines several key pull factors drawing people away from agrarian life. First and foremost is economic opportunity, the simple availability of jobs, and the promise of tapping into the global economy.
That makes sense. It's the classic search for a better living, but surely it's not just about finding a job in a factory or an office. What else is pulling them in?
It's also the pull of public services. Things that might be incredibly scarce or difficult to access in a rural village, like reliable healthcare facilities, specialized doctors, or higher education for children, are heavily concentrated in these urban centers.
Right, the infrastructure is already there.
Exactly. And underpinning all of this is a broader, massive systemic shift from agrarian economies to industrial economies in these specific regions. And when you add the fact that national and local government policies often intentionally prioritize urban development over rural investment, you create a perfect storm. The city becomes a magnet.
A magnet that just keeps getting bigger and stronger. Which brings us to a really interesting problem. When cities grow this fast and absorb this staggering volume of human beings, our old vocabulary for describing them completely breaks down, doesn't it?
Oh, completely.
We can't just call a place a big city when it holds more people than some entire countries.
We really can't. And that is why city categorizations have shifted to look at something called the regional population.
I want to dig into that because regional population sounds like a bureaucratic term, but it actually completely changes how you look at a map.
It does, because a regional population doesn't care about the arbitrary political lines drawn on a map that say city limits.
Right, those invisible borders don't mean much to the economy.
Precisely. It encompasses the central city proper, plus all of its economically linked suburbs and surrounding areas. Functionally, those suburbs are part of the city's living, breathing economic ecosystem.
Because the people in the suburbs work in the city.
They work there, they use its transit, they contribute to its economy. When we use that metric, we have to create entirely new categories for these urban giants.
Okay, so when we talk about these massive hubs, I keep seeing the word megacity in the text. Is that just a buzzword for a really big city, or is there an actual threshold a city has to cross to earn that title?
It's a very specific, defined threshold. A settlement reaches megacity status when its regional population hits 10 million people or more.
10 million.
Yes. These are places characterized by incredibly rapid growth, severe strain on their infrastructure, and their status as massive, undeniable regional economic hubs. The classic examples in the research are places like New York, Lagos, and Mumbai.
10 million people sharing one regional ecosystem is a phenomenal amount of density to wrap your head around. But the research doesn't stop there.
No, because human growth hasn't stopped there. We now have the metacity.
Metacity.
Right. A metacity is defined by a regional population threshold of 20 million or more people.
Unbelievably.
20 million people living in an interconnected urban environment. These are characterized not just by their astronomical population, but by their massive geographical footprints. They exert significant worldwide cultural and economic influence.
Like which ones?
Cities like Tokyo, Delhi, and Shanghai are prime examples. They effectively operate with the economic gravity of sovereign nations.
Here's where it gets really interesting. I want to look at the historical context the spatial data provides because this completely blew my mind. Think back to the year 1950.
Okay.
In 1950, there were exactly 2 megacities in the entire world. New York and Tokyo. Just 2 places on the entire planet with 10 million people.
It's wild to think about.
Today, there are more than 30. And as we noted earlier, the vast majority of these new giants are located in those rapidly industrializing regions.
Right. Going from 2 megacities to over 30 in a single human lifetime perfectly illustrates the unprecedented acceleration of this process. But it also introduces a major physical problem.
Space.
Exactly. Space. When you pack 10 or 20 million people into a regional population, the physical layout of the settlement has to fundamentally change. You simply cannot pack that many humans into a single central core. The city can't just grow upward forever. It has to expand outward.
And that outward expansion is something I think you listening can visualize right now. Think about your own local city or the major metropolitan area closest to you. Picture the downtown core with the skyscrapers, and then think about how the landscape changes as you drive outward on the highway.
It's a very universal experience now.
It is. Our source material breaks down this spatial arrangement into 3 distinct related processes. We have decentralization, suburbanization, and urban sprawl. Can we walk through the differences here? Because they sound similar, but they produce completely different landscapes.
Let's start with decentralization, which is the overarching physical trend. Decentralization is simply the spreading out of the urban population and services over a much larger geographical footprint.
So, leaving the center.
Yes. Historically, everything, the major jobs, the specialized shopping, the dense housing, was tightly packed into a traditional central business district, or CBD. Decentralization is the process of those functions slowly migrating away from the center and out toward the periphery.
And a major driver of that decentralization is suburbanization, right? Moving the actual residents from the urban core to the outskirts.
Precisely. But suburbanization didn't just happen randomly. It was heavily driven by transportation technology. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, it was streetcars that allowed people to live a little further out and commute in.
Right, the old streetcar suburbs.
Exactly. Then, massively, it was the automobile and the interstate highway systems. When you combine the mobility of the car with a strong cultural desire for single-family housing on cheaper land, you get the explosion of the planned suburbs.
But there is a darker, much more chaotic side to this outward expansion. What happens when that growth isn't planned out nicely with parks and cul-de-sacs?
That is what geographers define as urban sprawl. While suburbanization often involves some level of master planning, urban sprawl is defined by geographic expansion with little to no long-term vision.
It's just reactive.
Highly reactive. It's characterized by low-density residential housing, strip malls, and roads that are built reactively just to accommodate high volumes of migration. It's a city expanding as a reaction to population pressure rather than strategic growth.
Which naturally leads us to the physical results of all this sprawl and decentralization, because the city isn't just spreading out evenly like butter on a piece of toast.
No, not at all.
It's creating entirely new, highly specialized types of settlements out on the edges. The spatial research highlights 3 emerging land use forms. I'd bet you listening can recognize at least one of these from your own daily life. Let's start with edge cities. How is an edge city different from a normal suburb?
It's all about economic independence. Edge cities are semi-independent communities located on the outskirts of major cities, very typically situated near major highway intersections or beltways. What's fascinating is how they evolved.
How so?
Originally, say back in the mid-20th century, these were just purely residential suburbs. You slept there, and you commuted into the central city to work and shop. But between the 1960s and the 1990s, the corporations and the retail developers realized where the money was living. The jobs and the shopping started to follow the residents out of the city center.
So the suburb basically gets its own economy.
Exactly. Because of that shift, these edge cities became incredibly self-sufficient. They evolved to have their own distinct downtowns, massive office complexes, industrial parks, and entertainment districts. The key defining feature of an edge city is that its residents rarely, if ever, actually need to travel into the traditional central city for their daily necessities. Everything they need to live, work, and play is right there on the edge.
So if edge cities are what happens when suburbs get their own economy, what happens when suburbs just keep growing into each other until they become a massive, faceless municipality?
That is where we get into the phenomenon of the boom burb.
The boom burb. I love that term. The research defines a boom burb as an accidental city of over 100,000 residents. Think about how wild that is. We are now building massive, sprawling cities entirely by accident. Are we really just slapping down houses until a city forms?
In a way, yes. A boom burb is a suburb that has experienced incredibly rapid growth. But unlike a traditional city, it completely lacks a historic urban core or a centralized downtown. There is no central square or main street.
It's just sprawl.
It is essentially just a series of sprawling, intentionally planned residential communities that grew so fast and spread so wide that they eventually just merged into one giant, incorporated municipality of 100,000 people or more.
Do we have a good real-world example of this?
A crucial example in the data is Henderson, Nevada. It serves as a rapidly growing hub that is deeply connected to Las Vegas via major transportation routes. It has a massive population. It has its own municipal government, but visually and functionally, it operates as this massive merged entity of suburban developments rather than a traditional city with a center.
Okay, so we've got the self-sufficient edge cities and the accidental boom burbs. But what if you keep driving?
Keep going out.
Yeah, if you get on the highway and drive past the edge cities, past the boom burbs, way out beyond the traditional suburbs where the strip malls fade away, you hit the exurbs.
And the demographic profile of the exurb is completely distinct from the others. Exurbs are very low-density settlement areas located on land that was previously just rural farmland or wilderness.
So who's moving all the way out there?
The people moving here are typically wealthier citizens who are specifically seeking out a rural aesthetic. They want the large plots of land, they want the old-growth trees, they want the wildlife in their backyard.
Right, it's the classic, I want to see deer in my backyard, but I also need gigabit internet and my high-paying tech salary demographic. They want the country life, but with city money.
That is precisely the dynamic. They remain deeply economically linked to the central city's economy. But the catch to living in an exurb is connectivity.
Because you are so far away.
Exactly. If you live that far out, you are highly, highly dependent on automobiles. And increasingly, the research shows that these exurban residents rely heavily on telecommuting to maintain those economic ties to the city. They leverage technology so they can earn the city paycheck without having to make the grueling 2-hour daily drive. If we connect this to the bigger picture, all this outward expansion, this reliance on cars, and this massive internal growth pulling millions into the urban sphere leads to severe structural pressure.
The text has a great word for this.
Yes, the geographic data uses a wonderful phrase to describe this. The immensity of modern urban density creates tensity for city planners and governments.
So, what does this all mean? What does this tensity actually look like on the ground for the people living in these megacities and metacities?
It manifests as 4 critical systemic challenges. The first and most immediate is undeniable infrastructure strain. Think about trying to retrofit a plumbing and sanitation system that was originally built for 1 million people so that it can suddenly support 10 million people.
You can't just swap out a few pipes.
No, you have to tear up the entire foundation of the city. When you have megacities growing by millions of people in a single decade, the demand for basic human necessities, housing, clean water, power grids, becomes absolutely overwhelming. The physical infrastructure simply cannot be built or upgraded fast enough to keep up with the population influx.
And I imagine the second challenge is the environmental fallout from all of that construction and density.
Correct. The sheer density in the core brings intense, localized air and water pollution. But simultaneously, out on the periphery, the relentless march of urban sprawl means the constant, irreversible loss of valuable agricultural land.
That feels like a trap.
It is. We are caught in a paradox where we are paving over the very farmland needed to feed the growing urban population.
The third challenge is one you have absolutely felt in your bones if you live in any major metropolitan region:
No.
transportation.
Oh, definitely. The math of suburbanization and sprawl just doesn't work for transit. Sprawled areas that lack central planning and rely almost entirely on car dependency inevitably suffer from severe, paralyzing traffic congestion.
Because everyone is driving everywhere.
Right. You literally cannot build enough highway lanes to handle the volume of daily movement required when millions of people are spread out over hundreds of square miles and all need to move at the same time.
And finally, the research points to a major socioeconomic challenge. It turns out that when a city spreads out this far, the population doesn't just mix evenly.
No, the geography itself begins to separate people. Rapid urbanization and massive geographic spreading frequently lead to increased socioeconomic segregation.
How does that happen in practice?
Well, as these different specialized settlements form, like the wealthy telecommuting exurbs way out in the hills versus the strained, densely packed urban core, the geographic divides begin to mirror and reinforce economic divides. It's not necessarily by malicious design, it is a systemic outcome of how these massive regional populations sort themselves physically across a sprawling landscape based on housing costs and transit access.
It's a tremendous amount of transformation to process. To bring all of this together, what we are looking at is a global shift of epic proportions.
Epic is the right word.
We are moving from a world that was primarily agrarian and rural to one that is utterly dominated by massive, complex urban structures. We are talking about 20 million person metacities acting as global economic powerhouses. We're seeing the landscape mutate into accidental boom burbs, telecommuting exurbs, and self-sufficient edge cities.
That's all happening at once.
And hovering over all of this data is that one staggering projection.
Wow.
1.2 billion additional people joining these urban centers by the year 2050. It completely redefines what it means to live in a human settlement.
It really does. And looking at all this data leaves us with a fascinating paradox to consider.
What's that?
Well, think about it. If the rise of the exurbs is being driven by wealthy citizens who can rely entirely on telecommuting, and if edge cities already provide all the daily necessities, the corporate jobs, and the shopping without residents ever needing to access the central city,
Yeah.
will the traditional central business district eventually become completely obsolete?
Wow.
Are we watching the very concept of a city slowly turn completely inside out, where the edges hold all the power and the center empties out?
That is exactly the kind of question that makes spatial geography so captivating. It's not just maps, it's the future of how we live together. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. We hope this conversation gives you a whole new lens to view your own surroundings. The next time you are sitting in paralyzing traffic or driving past a brand new housing development on old farmland or just looking out at your own city skyline, We hope you see the invisible forces of urbanization shaping the world around you. Until next time, keep exploring.